Good morning.
Good morning.
I am excited about today. Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. What an incredible passage. What are the operative words in this passage?
Declare.
Declare.
Proclaim.
Proclaim. Pour forth speech.
Display knowledge.
Display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the earth. Wow. That means that the box is really pretty noisy. There's a lot of proclaiming and declaring and pouring forth of speech here. And that's what's exciting about our tour today, because you know what we're going to do in our tour today? We're going to look inside the box. Now, what is all this proclaiming doing? What is it proclaiming?
The glory of God.
The glory of God. That's right, Ketty, it is. The glory of God. And what else?
The work of His
The
hands.
work of His hands. That's what's in the box. When we open it up, what should we hear? What should we see? The glory of God and the work of His hands. And that is exactly what we're going to see. And I pray and hope that on this tour today, you are going to be amazed at the jewels in this cave. So what are we going to do? Today we're going to turn our faces to the northwest, and we are going to build another pillar. And it is going to be a pillar that is going to be critical for us, because we're going to find that this pillar is laying forth not only the incredible picture of God's creation and helping us understand that glory of God and to understand better the work of His hands and the order that we see there. But we're also going to find that, unfortunately, man has taken this pillar and has laid out, in opposition to that knowledge of God, one of the greatest lies that has been foisted upon man. So we're now going to turn our attention to this incredible pillar, and we're going to take a look at what God has done for us. Now, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to stand out in the middle of a meadow in the mountains on a dark evening and gaze into the skies. But it is very difficult in those moments not to get a sense of the grandeur of what God has done. To somehow be able to shut your ears from all of that proclaiming. It is almost overwhelming. And as Carl Sagan said, it really does stir us. But it stirs us for another reason. It does not stir us simply because we look and we see, oh my goodness, I'm made of this star stuff. No. Oh, what a mighty God we serve. Now, years ago, there was a little bit of a contest, it seems, to determine how many stars there were. Now, Jeremiah tells us that the stars are countless, but we've had people who've tried to count them. You may recall, in 128 BC, Hipparchus counted them, and he came up with 1,026. Can you imagine that? Kepler counted them in 1600 AD because he said, Hipparchus, may have double counted some, and he came up with 1,005. Do you know that we have counted the stars as best we can now with the technology we have, the Hubble telescope? Do you know how many stars we've counted? In 2003, and that's the latest count I could find, there were 70 sextillion stars. I mean, think about that. What do we have? We have 1 million. We have 1 billion. We have 1 trillion, and now we're getting up to places it's hard for us to understand. And then we have 1 quadrillion. And then we have 1 million is what I think of from my German background. 1 pentillion, and we finally get to 1 sextillion. 21 zeros. How can you even begin to fathom that? What an incredible thing that lays before us. It is not difficult when you're standing out before the grandeur of God's creation, when you just look at the skies, to not be filled with wonder, with a deep wonder. In fact, it's easy at that point to begin to look at what God has given to us and become more like a child at that moment, and to begin to look at what God has done more through the eyes of a child. I'd like for you to look at that through the eyes of a child for a moment.
Did you ever wonder? Did you ever wonder? I wonder. Did you ever wonder? Did you ever wonder? I do. Did you ever wonder why the sun always rises, but the stars never fall? Why dry land is never satisfied by water? And why fire never says enough? Enough. I wonder, why can't I see the wind, but I can feel it? How the wind blows? Why the wind blows? Did you ever wonder how an eagle floats through the sky? Where ideas come from? Where babies come from? Where do people go when they die? Where heaven is? Did you know that my fingerprint is the only one like it in the entire world? My tongue, too. Did you ever wonder how a hummingbird can fly up to 60 miles per hour and come up to an abrupt stop? Wings buzzing at 70 beats per second. Crazy. Cool. Did you ever wonder why there are so many beautiful shades of skin? Why a lizard can grow a new tail? No way. No way. Here's one for you. In the time that it takes me to tell you this little known fact, 50,000 cells in your body will die down and be replaced with new ones. Did you ever wonder how a sneeze zooms out of your mouth at over 100 miles per hour? And how a mustard seed the size of a pinhead can grow into a very big tree? How a caterpillar can turn into a beautiful butterfly? If there's anything at the end of the galaxy, if there's anything outside of time, how it all started, how it all stays together, where is it going? Did you ever wonder? Did you ever wonder? I do.
Wow. Did you ever wonder? You know, it is amazing to me that we can find ourselves looking into this box and not be filled with wonder at what is in there. What we're going to find is that it really isn't just a random, chaotic universe brought about as a result of chance. But in reality, when we open it up, you know what we see? If we're honest with it, we see and we hear the proclaiming of the glory of God. Something has changed, though. Romans expresses to us the reality that God has revealed himself in what he has made, but man doesn't react to it the way he should. Look at Romans chapter 1 with me. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Let me stop here before we continue. Is God's handiwork difficult to see? Is it hidden? Is it somehow obscured somewhere? Is it?
No.
God has made it what?
Plain.
Plain to them. It is plain to us. In other words, we've almost got to go out of our way here to deny this. And what we're going to see through all of this is that man has a tendency, because of what has occurred as a result of the fall, to look at that which is plain and ignore it. Let's continue. Look. For although they knew God, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, and we're going to see a lot of people who claim to be wise today, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. Psalm 53 says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. I don't believe that is a phrase of derision here. I think it is simply a statement of fact. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Why is he called a fool? Because it is plain to him. Okay, Grant, let me ask you to do something.
Okay.
I want you to think of nothing. And more specifically, I want you to think of nothing, nothing.
Since nothing is nothing, what am I supposed to think about?
Okay. I want you to think of the essence of what nothing is. I don't want you to not think. I want you to think of the essence of what nothing is. Can you think of that?
Mm-mm.
Well, this is an important thing for us to think of, because thinking of nothing is really an important thing for us to do at this point. Because in reality, the great cosmological question that confronts us is the issue of where did the cosmos come from? There are only two answers to this question. What are they? Number one, that the cosmos had a beginning. In other words, at some point, there was nothing.
And then there was something.
And then there was something. The other answer is that the cosmos, Ashley, what did Carl Sagan tell us? The cosmos has always been, right? The cosmos has always been. So, those are the two answers. It either had a beginning or it has always existed. Now, do you realize without God in this picture, both of these answers have deep, difficult problems? Let's look at them briefly. What is the problem associated with saying that the cosmos is all that is, ever was, or ever will be? You now have a cosmos that has been in existence for eternity, for forever. Can you think of a cosmos that has existed forever? Go back in your mind to the eternal past, and what do you have? The cosmos. Now, what do we know about the cosmos today? Scientifically, we know from the second law of thermodynamics that energy is always being converted into less useful energy. It is winding down. That's what we see from all around us. If that is the case, and we are now in the eternal future, then what should the cosmos look like today? Dead. That's exactly right, Joshua. Why does it look dead?
Because all the energy would have ran out.
That's exactly right. Think of it this way. Let's say you're driving your car, and we have a little gauge in your car, and the gauge tells you that you're using up the gas in your tank. How long will you be able to drive your car? Forever? Assuming there's no place to stop and get gas. At some point, you run out of gas. That's the major problem with a cosmos that is eternal. All the laws that we know about the cosmos won't fit with that. Let's look at the other problem. The cosmos had a beginning. What is before the cosmos if it had a beginning? If you leave God out of the picture, what's there, Grant?
Nothing.
Can you think back there? Think with me. Let's go back. Are you with me? Are you thinking at this point of nothing? Have you got that now? We are there. Nothing, nothing. Ready? Boom, everything. Have you got it? Do you want to see that again? We have nothing, nothing. Boom, we have everything. It's kind of like magic, isn't it? That is why Sartre said the great philosophical question is, why is there something rather than nothing? Great philosophical question when you leave God out of the picture. So all of a sudden now, we have a problem with both of the answers to this question. Do you know this is what Einstein was troubled with when he came to the point where he developed his theory of relativity? Do you know what he had to add into that? Because the theory of relativity pointed us back to what we now know as the Big Bang. And all the scientific evidence now continues to point back that the universe had a beginning. And it was a beginning from nothing. But Einstein was, as he said, irritated by that. Why? Because it left him face to face with a problem associated with something coming from nothing. And that's why he added into his theory his cosmological constant, which he later on, as a result of more evidence coming in, confirming the reality that it came from nothing. He said it was one of the biggest blunders of his life. But why did he put it in there? Otherwise, you have to deal with this insane notion that you begin with nothing, nothing, and all of a sudden you have everything. And by the way, when you're talking to people about this issue, and you drive them back to this point, and they have to come to the point where they say they have this nothing, nothing, then boom, everything is there. And I say, wow, you're a man of faith. I'm a man of faith too. Let's talk about our faith. Don't be duped into thinking that because we believe in a God, then we just simply stand on some whimsical faith. Oh no, the philosophy that has arisen now requires much greater faith. So what do we have here? These great metaphysical questions that confront us. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is anything in motion? Joshua, that was what we were talking about. Why do we not have a dead universe? Why is anything in motion rather than everything still? Why is there order rather than chaos? Why is there life rather than deadness? And then my favorite, why is there music? Have you ever thought about that? Study the reality and the order of music and the tones. Where did that come from? Can you think of that evolving? How did that happen? Oh, the heavens declare the glory of God. So the cosmos reveals two choices to us. When we look at this box, this cosmos, there are only two things that it can do. One is that it can reveal to us that there is a creator. There is a transcendent creator who has created the cosmos, or it created itself from nothing. Now, what we're doing here is we are turning our attention to this aspect of God's revelation, that God created the cosmos, that He acts within the cosmos, and that He has revealed Himself. Remember our two presuppositions? What were they?
That it always
That God exists, and two,
He has revealed Himself.
that He has revealed Himself to us. How has He revealed Himself, Grant?
Through His Word.
Through His Word. And that is what we call special revelation. The special revelation of God revealed to us through His Word. But He's also revealed to us, Psalm 19 says, how? And Romans 1 says, how?
Through creation.
Through His creation, which we call general revelation. So through His Word, which we call special revelation, and through His cosmos, that the cosmos reveals itself to us, what we call general revelation. And that is what we're going to turn our attention to look at this general revelation of God that Romans 1 is talking to us about, that the heavens declare the glory of God, and we can listen to it, and it is a valid source of truth, because Romans 1 says it is plain to us. Now, when you begin to look at the cosmos from this perspective, and you know that you're now dealing with some serious issues associated with the fact that the cosmos, everything in it appears to say it had a beginning and it came from nothing, that poses a deep problem for me. There's only one element that will help you kind of wash away the stark reality of that. Wald said, time is the hero of the plot here. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. What is he saying? That when you look inside the box and you see the enormity of the complexity of the order and the grandeur and everything that is in it, how in the world are you going to reconcile within your mind that this just came from nothing? Wald says, well, the great magic wand here is time. Billions and billions of years, and somewhere in the midst of saying billions and billions of years, somehow, Wald says, the impossible becomes possible. And we will see that kind of hand-waving going on and on. So, we're dealing with a battle here. We really are. We're dealing with a battle over what it is that we really see. What do we hear? Now, if you recall, we began by looking at an instance of hollow and deceptive philosophy. Colossians 2:8 says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. And we took a look at that time at the opening segment of Carl Sagan's The Cosmos. And what I want to do is revisit another clip that you didn't see. So now that you are beginning to develop this discernment, listen to Carl Sagan.
I believe our future depends powerfully on how well we understand this cosmos in which we float like a mote of dust.
We wish to pursue the truth no matter where it leads. But to find the truth, we need imagination and skepticism both. We will not be afraid to speculate, but we will be careful to distinguish speculation from fact.
Now, what did you hear? What was the first thing you heard?
We'll follow the truth wherever it leads.
Here it is. Our future depends powerfully on how well we understand this cosmos. Well, of course it is. If there is no God, then we're dependent, our whole future is dependent upon the stuff in the box, is it not? And how well we understand what's in the box. And then what did he say?
We'll follow the truth wherever it leads.
We're going to follow the truth wherever it leads. He said, we wish to pursue the truth no matter where it leads. That's kind of like saying we're going to take the intellectual high ground here. But you know what? This is a dishonest statement. Because if that truth leads to the reality of a transcendent creator, we will ignore it. So when he says we wish to pursue the truth no matter where it leads, no, that's not true. And then he says something interesting. But to find the truth, here's a scientist, but to find the truth, we need imagination and skepticism. And we're going to see a lot of imagination as we begin to take a look at what happens when men look into the box and stare upon the work of God and attempt to deny it. And then finally he says, we will not be afraid to speculate, but we will be careful to distinguish speculation from fact. Well, we're going to see if that is the case. What is plain? If God says it is plain, then what is plain? Now, first of all, let's make sure we understand what we mean by science. Let's look at Oxford's definition. It is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Good. What it means is we're going to systematically study and look at the stuff in the box. Now, that then means that science and philosophy are therefore very closely linked. What is philosophy trying to do? It's trying to develop truth claims about reality. Remember, philosophy was seeking to understand ultimate reality. Philosophy is trying to develop truth claims for those large universal questions. Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Science is trying to develop the truth claims about the particulars in the box. So they're both seeking reality, but they're both seeking to make truth claims about that reality. We've already seen what happened in philosophy when we shut ourselves off from the source of ultimate truth and the universal truths as God has given to us. We're going to see the same thing in this realm. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a great deal of marvelous and wonderful science that is going on today around us. But what we're going to find is the thing that has happened is that science, in many cases, has moved back into a philosophical mode and now is attempting, as the philosophers of old have attempted to do, and as we saw over and over again, came up to that big gap. In many cases, science is now trying to profess to us philosophical statements from the particulars in the box. Where do we come from? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life? And that is what we need to focus on and where we'll be heading. Kepler, in looking at this grandeur that God had given to us, said the chief aim of all investigations of the external world should be to discover the rational order and harmony which has been imposed on it by God. Is that the chief aim of our scientific investigation today? No, if your worldview begins with God is not. You may say that we will follow the truth no matter where it leads, but if it leads back to Him, we'll cut it off immediately and ignore it and deny it. Kepler said, no, the chief aim is to discover the work of His hands. You may not know this, but quite frankly, the vast majority of the early scientists had this perspective. Dr. Stephen Meyer will address that.
The earliest scientists, whether it was Sir Isaac Newton or Robert Boyle or before him Johannes Kepler, Galileo, many of those scientists were very strongly committed to the idea of the existence of God and to Christianity in many cases. They were, moreover, convinced that the universe bore evidence of design and that it was therefore intelligible to the human intellect. In fact, the idea of design was one of the inspirations for the scientific revolution, because the conviction that we could study nature and make sense of it derived from that idea that it was the product of a rational intellect. And if a rational intellect had created nature, had given it order, had given it its so-called laws, then it became possible for us to make sense of that order.
What he's talking about is that if the box really is a random, chaotic box, then we would have no reason to study it. It's the whole issue, dealing with the difference between something which has been designed and something which is truly random. Now, let's suppose that I asked you to write a 100-page thesis paper on those numbers. Would you look forward to that? Charlene, you don't think you'd look forward to that?
No.
Why not?
I'm bad with numbers.
Why would it not be something that you would really look forward to, writing 100 pages on those random numbers?
Doesn't make sense.
There's nothing there. Why? That is what randomness means. Randomness means that there is nothing intelligent here. It is purely random, purely chance. Now, the problem is that there is a lot of order there already. Well, what I'd like for you to do is take a look at a clip from an incredible video that has been produced, and one that I think you will find fascinating. We're going to look at several clips of it today. Unlocking the Mysteries of Life. And they're talking about this issue of chance and order. Let's look at it.
By the 1970s, most researchers had rejected the idea that the information necessary to build the first cell originated by chance alone. To understand why, consider the difficulty of generating just 2 lines of Shakespeare's play Hamlet by dropping Scrabble letters onto a tabletop. Then consider that the specific genetic instructions required to build the proteins in even the simplest one-celled organism would fill hundreds of pages of printed text.
Now, it's a short clip, but it's saying an awful lot there. Think about how long it would take for you to drop Scrabble letters on a table simply to come up with those 2 lines from Shakespeare. How long do you suppose it would take? Ashley, how long do you think it'd take you to drop letters on a table to finally get there?
I'd be gone before it happened.
You'd be gone. I think you're probably right. But do you know what? That example presupposes something. It presupposes that there are Scrabble letters with letters on it, does it not? The way we really should look at this is that you have someone over in an earlier table with blank Scrabble squares and a paintbrush flicking paint on those squares trying to get a letter. How long would it take, Ashley, to sprinkle ink on these letters until you finally get one letter?
A long time.
We would all be gone for sure. And then you finally get one letter, and that goes over to the table that we're going to finally build our letters of Scrabble letters that we're going to drop on the table to get 2 lines of Shakespeare. Do you understand that this is one of the fundamental issues that is becoming a difficult question to answer, and that is, where does this organized information come from? The impossibility of that is what Wald says, well, yeah, I know it's impossible, but just mix in enough time and it all becomes possible. It's like the magic wand. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Well, what do we really hear when we look at the cosmos, when we really listen to it? What is it that it says to us? Several years ago, a man by the name of David Breese wrote a book entitled 7 Men Who Rule the World from the Grave. His list includes 7. We could add some more. But the point he's making is that this is what happens when men can change our worldview. Darwin, from my standpoint, is the foundation of that. And that is why we're going to turn our attention to his theory, because it is one of the primary theories that has been used to persuade people that we really don't need a God. It's one of the most influential theories in modern civilization, and we're going to take the time to examine it and ask ourselves, does it really match reality? Now, we have to do a little work here first, because it's important for us to understand when we're talking about science, that we understand what we mean when we talk about 3 words: hypothesis, theory, and law. What are they? Let me give you just a brief, very brief example. And it may seem very simplistic, and it will be. Let's suppose that this represents reality. This is what is really real in the box. How does science approach trying to develop the truth claims about the particulars in the box? Normally, we begin with what we call a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is a very early assumption based upon some limited looks into the box. Basic data. We build an early assumption that will allow us to begin to further investigate. If you investigate long enough and you examine the stuff in the box and it begins to confirm that hypothesis, we then move to a theory. And a theory is much more sophisticated, because a theory now begins to predict, based upon its theory, that when you reach down into the box at a particular place in a particular time, you will get data which supports that theory. Kepler, for example, and others have given us the truth claim about the orbits of bodies around the Earth and around the Sun and so forth, that we can predict that if we launch a rocket in this direction at this velocity, we will be able to land on the moon, not on Pluto. So a theory is one that allows us to begin to predict that the data in reality will match what our truth claim says. Eventually, we might work our way to the declaration of a law. And a law is a truth claim that is very broad, that says, no matter where you reach within this realm, the reaches of the law, you will find this to be true, this to be true, this to be true. The data will match that law. Now, what happens if we have an assumption, a hypothesis, and we are gathering data, and all of a sudden that data doesn't match the hypothesis? What do we do, Jason?
We throw it out because it's wrong, or change the hypothesis.
Well, yeah, we throw it out or we change it. Why?
Because it's obviously a bad hypothesis.
And why is it a bad hypothesis?
Because it didn't give you the proper data when you
It doesn't
tested
match reality.
Right.
Correct? So let's suppose we've now moved to a theory. And we have a theory that has gone through that stage. And we are now to the point where we can predict data. And we predict and say, when you reach into reality here, you're going to find a yellow ball. and we get a green triangle. What happens?
Well, you check your testing, and then you go back to the hypothesis, because obviously your theory is bad.
That's right. First of all, you say, well, did we reach into the right place in reality and da-da-da? But let's suppose we did, and we pull out a green triangle. We go back and say, we've got something wrong with the theory. That's exactly what science does. Well, it's important for us to recognize that because we have to deal with these words. And in particular, we have to deal with the word of a theory. That's what we're going to do. We're going to examine Darwinian evolution, and we're going to ask ourselves whether or not this theory does match reality. How does it stack up against reality? We have some incredible statements about this theory. Huxley said, Darwin's theory is no longer a theory, but a fact. Darwinianism has come of age, so to speak. We are no longer having to bother about establishing the fact of evolution. What is Huxley saying about this theory? Now, he doesn't want to use the term law because that implies something very serious in the scientific language. But he's willing to call it a fact. Asimov. Today, although many educators play it safe by calling evolutionary ideas theory instead of fact, there is no reputable biologist who doubts that species, including Homo sapiens, have developed with time and that they are continually, though slowly, changing. Fact. Carl Sagan. Evolution is a fact amply demonstrated by the fossil record and by contemporary molecular biology. Natural selection is a successful theory devised to explain the fact of evolution. Now, Dawkins even goes a little further. He says it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. Now, if you are disconnected with what's going on in academia today, you will not realize that Dawkins' perspective is a perspective that is carried by many professors in our universities. For those students who come into the class believing that God is the transcendent creator, they are soon led to believe that they should be considered ignorant or stupid or insane, maybe even possibly wicked. So here we have this consistent picture that evolutionary theory is a fact. And it's the assumption of virtually all school textbooks. This is my daughter's college biology textbook. Let me show you what it says about this theory. The theory of evolution is no less reliable than is the atomic theory or the germ theory of infectious disease. As with atoms, which cannot be directly observed, we cannot directly observe the production of new species by evolution. Biologists have gathered a tremendous amount of evidence in support of biological evolution, however. And not one major piece of evidence has ever been obtained that suggests that it has not occurred. Conversely, the so-called theory of creationism proposes no testable hypothesis and thus cannot be proven right or wrong. Proponents simply accept it on faith. The theory of evolution, however, suggests many predictions that can be tested. Okay? This is an interesting statement by Dr. Berlinski. Let me just let you hear it to some extent in response to what we just saw in terms of the idea that, well, it's just these fundamentalist religious people who are opposing evolution.
The claim that all skeptics about Darwinian orthodoxy or Christian fundamentalists stands refuted by me. It's obviously not true. I'm neither Christian nor a fundamentalist. But lots and lots of people are skeptical in the scientific community. I know dozens of mathematicians who scratch their head and say, you guys think this is the way life originated? It's absolutely a preposterous theory. And many, many very significant figures. John von Neumann, one of the great mathematicians of the 20th century, just laughed at Darwinian theory. He hooted at it. So it's perfectly absurd. This is a point in a polemical dispute. It's not a reasonable standard of criticism. Opposition to Darwinian theory is I wouldn't say widespread, but there's a consistent group of people among mathematicians, among physicists, among some very good speculative biologists who simply don't accept it, don't even regard it as a scientific theory in any reasonable sense.
The theory is in trouble. What is really true? What are we looking at? Now, about a year ago, I was watching my graduate school. I went to Auburn University. And they were playing in the Southeast Conference Championship football game, and they were playing against the Tennessee Volunteers. And as we were watching this game, it was an important game, critical game, championship game. It was a close game, and the Tennessee team was close to the goal line, and the Tennessee quarterback dropped back and threw a long pass, and one of the Tennessee receivers leaped out parallel to the ground and caught the ball just before it hit the ground, and immediately all the Tennessee players screamed with joy, and all the Tennessee fans jumped with joy, touchdown, except something strange happened. At that moment, the Auburn players all immediately said, incomplete. And all the Auburn fans immediately said, incomplete, instantly. How is this possible? Was it a touchdown or was it not? Now, I was watching it, and I saw for certain that it was incomplete. The referees called it good, but they obviously missed the call. How is it that thousands of people immediately saw the same thing but concluded a different truth claim from it? Interesting, is it not? Well, what happens is that man has a tendency to see his own position. We need to be careful as well as Christians, that we don't simply just see what we want to see. Because quite frankly, folks, in this area of science, the data is pouring in. The deeper we look into space, the more close we look into the cell and everything else, the more we see and hear, the heavens declare the glory of God. You and I do not need to be afraid to look into a telescope. We do not need to be afraid to look into the microscope, because the evidence supports the truth of God. In fact, the more it pours in, the more there is developing a deep, troubling sense by those who see the universe as nothing but just a box. Now, there was a man who wrote a book in the 1800s, and his name was William Paley. An incredible man. And his book is titled Natural Theology, or Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity Collected from the Appearances of Nature. That's when titles were very long. But William Paley, in this book, spoke of an interesting opening scenario. And it goes something like this. He says, suppose a man was walking through the moors, let's say forest, and his foot happened to dislodge an object. He picked up the object and he began to examine it. And he noticed when he pushed the little thing here that the lid opened up. And inside he began to notice that there were numbers, and a little small hand and a larger hand. And when he put it to his ear, he heard a ticking sound. And the more he observed, he began to realize that it somehow kept time with the morning and the evening and the days. Now, William Paley said no one in their right mind would look at this and say, my goodness, look what the pine sap and the pine straw and the freezing and the thawing and the cold and the wind and maybe a little squirrel fur here or there have produced an amazing thing, don't you think? And Paley says no one would think that. Why? Because it is obvious to us that this is a pocket watch and it has been created by a watchmaker. It was called, and is still called, Paley's argument for design. Well, there was another book, you fast forward now, 200 years approximately, and there is now a book written by Richard Dawkins entitled The Blind Watchmaker. Dawkins is attempting to refute the old argument of Paley, which for years was put in the dustbin, but now because of the evidence is being revised. And so in his book called The Blind Watchmaker, he says this: natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic processes which Darwin discovered and which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind and no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. Now, this is interesting because we are now coming to the point where it is getting more difficult to cover our ears, to close our eyes to this noisy universe. Look at this statement by Dawkins. He says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Do you understand what he's saying? I know it looks designed, I know it looks like it had a purpose, but it doesn't. Interesting statement. Now, Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, brilliant man. Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Can you imagine this? A student in Dr. Crick's class. Dr. Crick is saying, repeat after me. It was not designed. It was not designed. It was not designed. Why do you have to do that? Because it looks designed. Can you imagine if the forensic investigator or the insurance investigator coming upon the scene and saying, boy, it sure looks like arson to me, but no, we can't accept that argument. Oh, sure looks to me like this guy was murdered, but no, we can't accept that. It has to be an accident. Do you understand what is happening here? The evidence points that someone started the fire. The evidence points that someone had a hand in this murder, but we will turn a blind eye to it. Why? Because we've shut ourselves off of anything outside the box. And so Dawkins and Crick and others are now in the mode of trying to convince us to say, look, repeat after me, it was not designed. It just appears that way. Well, you know what? It's really kind of silly, is it not? I don't know how many of you have driven by Mount Rushmore, but I guarantee you, people don't drive by Mount Rushmore and say, hey kids, look what the rain and the snow and the wind have done to this mountain here. Well, by golly, that looks a little like George Washington. And what a coincidence, right next to him is something that looks a little like Thomas Jefferson. No one would do that. How is it that we know that when we walk along the ground and someone discovers an arrowhead, that it's not just a weird-looking rock? We recognize design. It is obvious to us. In fact, it is plain to us. Why do we turn away from it? Charles Darwin said, I remember well the time when the thought of the eye made me cold all over. Why do you suppose the thought of the eye made Darwin cold all over?
Because it doesn't work unless it's...
It doesn't fit. There is so much incredible design within the eye. He says, but I've got over the stage of the complaint, and now small, trifling particulars of structure often make me very uncomfortable. The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. Why did a peacock's feather make Darwin sick? Why do you suppose, Jay?
It's like someone actually designed it.
How did the peacock somehow create this feather with what looks like an eye on it? Oh, the heavens declare the glory of God. All you have to do is look. All you have to do is look, because it is plain to us.